Open a Bible back to Daniel chapter 6. We are talking this quarter on Wednesday nights here in the auditorium about the book of Daniel and using it not only to grow in our appreciation of that fascinating Old Testament book, but also using it to lay a foundation for everything that we're talking about this year. Our theme here at Laurel Canyon is victory, the victory that God makes available to all of us in Jesus Christ. And even though Daniel is an ancient book, it greatly helps us to understand this theme of victory, what God has been doing throughout history and what he has done so that you and I might enjoy incredible victory in Jesus Christ. We're going to be in Daniel 6 here in just a few minutes. Of course, we want to begin our time together with a word of prayer. If you will, bow with me, please. Let's pray together. Holy Father in heaven, hallowed be your great, high, holy name. You dwell in unapproachable light, and we are in awe of your magnificence, your perfection. You are high above us, and we are completely unworthy. But you have invited us to play a part in your incredible plan, to share in your great joy by your amazing grace. And we thank you for that this evening. Thank you for your word and its living power to shape our understanding and lead us in paths of righteousness. Thank you for the incredible examples of men and women that you have preserved for our learning and for our inspiration. We thank you for the gift of the church and your wisdom in providing it, so that as we do our best to walk in paths of righteousness, we're not doing that alone, but that we have each other. We have brothers and sisters in this new spiritual family. We thank you for the opportunity that we have tonight to study together, to reflect together on what you have done and are doing and will do in this world. We pray your blessing on us as we study and on all who are studying and teaching throughout this building this evening. Help us to center our minds on this great truth that you rule, you reign, and that we need to submit ourselves to you as individuals and as families and as a church to your sovereignty. Thank you for this victory that is available in and through Jesus Christ. And it is in his name that we pray. Amen. Daniel chapter 6. One more time, if you have not gotten material, it is just outside of the doors there. Think about where we have been. I appreciate David filling in last Wednesday evening. In Daniel chapter 1, we were introduced to 4 young Hebrews who were carried away from their homeland by Nebuchadnezzar and the conquering Babylonian armies all the way over to Babylon. And remember, from the very beginning, there is tension as to what these young Hebrews are going to do under foreign influence, under pagan pressure. What are you going to do when you know what the Creator God would have you to do and how he would have you to live, but there is also great societal pressure all around? And we were introduced to these young men as men of courage and integrity and faithfulness to God in Daniel chapter 1. In Daniel chapter 2, even this great and mighty King Nebuchadnezzar is greatly disturbed because of a dream that he has. And there is no one who is able to interpret that dream other than Daniel, one of those 4 Hebrew transplants over to Babylon. And he, with the help of God, helps Nebuchadnezzar to understand that history is moving and there is someone behind that, someone much greater than Nebuchadnezzar or any human monarch on the face of the earth, either past or present or future. And God, through Daniel, enables Nebuchadnezzar to see, yes, you are comparable to the head of a statue that is fine gold, But you're not going to last forever, and your empire is not going to last forever. There is a God who rules and who gives rule to human beings as he sees fit. Ultimately, he is going to accomplish his purposes in establishing a kingdom that will never be destroyed. In Daniel chapter 3, we've got another instance of Nebuchadnezzar learning the hard way that he is not the main character of the story. Remember, he erects a 90-foot golden statue and expects everyone, when they hear certain music, to bow down and worship what he has done. 3 young Hebrew men are specifically singled out as unwilling to do that. They have this showdown with Nebuchadnezzar, and he learns that there is a God, this God of the Hebrews, who is able to do incredible things and foil Nebuchadnezzar's great and self-serving ambitions. In Daniel chapter 4, we've got the humiliation of Nebuchadnezzar, where he finally learns, it would appear, he is remarking to himself about the grandeur and the glory of Babylon that he has fashioned. And Daniel 4:31 tells us, while the words were still in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven, O King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is spoken, the kingdom has departed from you, and you shall be driven from among men, and your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, and you shall be made to eat grass like an ox, and 7 periods of time shall pass over you, until you know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men, and gives it to whom he will. In Daniel chapter 5, you noticed last week a pivotal transition from the Babylonian Empire as the major player on this world stage. We looked at a giant timeline in week number 1, the history of the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah. We noticed the end of the kingdom of Israel with Assyrian captivity. From there, biblical focus shifts to exclusively this kingdom of Judah, and it was here that we were introduced to Daniel and his 3 friends. But even on this timeline, you notice that the time of the Babylonians comes to an end, and power shifts from Babylon to the empire of Persia. Last week you were in Daniel 5, verse 25. There was this handwriting on the wall, and the interpretation of that was, number 1, God has numbered the days of your kingdom. Belshazzar, the last of these Babylonian monarchs, he has brought it to an end. You have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. And we ended verse 30, that very night Belshazzar the Chaldean king was killed, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. Now, in Daniel chapter 6, we come to the last of these 6 episodes. Each chapter has provided a different lesson, different key character, at times different monarchs that are involved, and there are 6 isolated incidents in this history. Let me ask you, even before we look at Daniel 6 and verse 1, what has been the point? We specifically want to continue to bring the big picture back into view. Has this just been an exercise in learning 6 Old Testament stories that even we can teach our little kids about, standing up against evil people and be courageous and be willing to go through hardship if necessary? Has that been the point? Just 6 good examples? If it's bigger than that, what is it? What?
God's in control.
God is in control. Alan, you had your hand raised.
Yes, of course. Also, these are glimpses back through history that they can see.
Yeah. Things that the Jews were learning even here. And that's what we want to try and make sure we maintain at the forefront of our minds. The Jews have been scattered all over the world because they would not listen to God. The kingdom of Israel in the north learned it the hard way. The kingdom of Judah in the south learned it the hard way. God is worthy of respect. He demands obedience. We must submit to Him whether we are Jews or Gentiles, men, women, rich, poor, slave, king, whomever we are. There is a God in heaven. But especially, like Dwight put it, this is about more than just look at these great Old Testament examples. It is a way, first of all, to teach God's people in exile, God is still in control. And it is something that God has preserved now for more than 2 millennia to communicate to His people wherever and whenever they live. Whatever is going on, you belong to God first. You are a part of His people first. We want to continue to bring that to the forefront of our mind. These are historical ways that God shows, I reign. It's going to be very important for us to keep that big picture in mind, especially going into next week where things begin to get really weird in the book of Daniel. We've already referenced that. Daniel 1 through 6, pretty straightforward character studies. Daniel 7, it begins to get very, very strange. But as long as we can keep the big picture in mind, we've got a kind of guiding North Star to help us through these difficult waters. Jason, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Just simply adding that not only is He in control, but He also is who matters, right?
Yeah.
Is that it's not just He's observing and interacting, but we as people should be yielding to Him and considering Him in what we do.
Yeah. And fundamental truths like that are just as relevant this evening in America, 2015, as they were then. Paul, go ahead.
I was just going to say, as we see through all these different affairs that happen, it's like God knows we are short-sighted people.
Yeah.
And what better way to teach it? Repetition.
Yeah.
We keep seeing the same thing over and over and over.
Sure. And that's a good segue to where we're going now. Babylon, Daniel 1 through 5. The big player on the world stage. God said before it happened, He even said the very night it happened, you have been used by me. Think about that. The most powerful empire that the world has seen to that point in time, with the most powerful rulers who had ruled this giant stretch of land, God is able to show in undeniable fashion, yes, you are powerful, but I can use you to accomplish my ultimate purposes. Daniel 1 through 5. Daniel 6, power has shifted now from the Babylonian Empire to an even bigger empire. The empire of the Medes and the Persians. And it's the same sort of thing. And again, we want to get that in our minds. It's going to be the same basic template as, Lord willing, next quarter we go into the book of Revelation. Great and terrible things that we read about. But in 2 words, that book is about God wins. Daniel, God rules. Revelation, God wins. God is able to use whatever circumstance to accomplish His purpose. Okay? Keep that in mind. Daniel 1 through 5, Babylon, now Daniel chapter 6, the Medes and the Persians. Let's go, beginning in verse 1. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps. We read about these men in the book of Ezra. We read about them in Esther. You can see some references to that in our material. They are literally protectors of the empire. These are the emperor's representatives over this massive stretch of land. It is the biggest empire that the world had known to that point. It went from India in the east to Ethiopia in the southwest. A giant stretch of land. Darius is the one who reigns over it. He has 120 protectors of the empire throughout the whole kingdom. And over those 120, there are 3 high officials. And guess who is one of them? Daniel. I mean, all along the way, we were introduced to him perhaps as a teenager. If not a teenager, very, very close to a teenager. Now we begin to do the math. He's probably in his 80s at this point. This man has been a stranger, an exile in a foreign land, far away from Jerusalem, from, let's say, his teenage years to his 80s. And every time someone tries to stand between him and God, he maintains his faith. Every time someone tries to use his faith to tear him down and embarrass him or destroy him, here is a man now in his 80s who will not compromise. Every time he's on what those in the empire would say, the wrong side of history, right? You're on the wrong side of this rising tide. He maintains his faith, and God is glorified. And that's the point, right, of why we're here. Walk by faith, not by sight. Whether by life or by death, we glorify God. Here is this man now in his 80s. He's one of the most exalted people in this massive empire. Verse 3, then this Daniel became distinguished above all the other high officials. So you got 120 protectors of the empire. You've got 3 high officials. And Daniel just keeps climbing the ladder because an excellent spirit was in him. And the king, Darius, planned to set him over the whole kingdom. Then the high officials and the satraps sought to find ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom, but they could find no ground for complaint or any fault because he was faithful, and no error or fault was found in him. Verse 5, then these men said, we shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God. Let's try and put that in easily understandable, practical terms. What are we being told about Daniel here? We were introduced to him as a teenager. He's in his 80s now. Who's this man? What's he all about? Alex?
Despite being a refugee in the land, despite being faithful to the previous king, he's faithful even to the current king under a new empire that just started.
Okay. Alex?
Also, can't you see those people, those not Jews? Look at Daniel, and the man came through the fire.
Absolutely. Time after time after time.
He cannot be reckoned with unless they find fault with his God.
Okay? Other thoughts? So what we're being told about this man. John?
He hasn't broken any laws.
Okay? He is an outstanding citizen. Right? This is not his homeland. But he is not a rebel. He is not a revolutionary. He is a man of intense, fervent faith in God. But they can't find anything to pin on him as far as a lack of integrity, a lack of faithfulness in living the way someone ought to live. He is a model citizen, right? But I want you to notice what's about to happen. He is a man of faith, a model citizen, and the social, political scene is about to come head-to-head with that, and there is a giant clash. And what do you do as a man or a woman of faith when societal pressure is flowing one way, and your faith in God, who has spoken and revealed himself and calls you to submit to him, is pointing in a completely different direction? That's not just an isolated, hypothetical sort of thing, is it? People of God have been confronted with that tension, experienced that tension over and over and over again. Do we not feel the rising of that tension in our own nation? at this point in time. Here we are, people of God. God has clearly spoken, and yet we see culture heading further and further and further away from God. So what do you do when increasingly society and circumstances and pressures and norms around you are heading in a very contrary way to the way that God has called you to live? This is not just ancient history where we're going back and looking at a good example, but can't really apply it to our circumstances. Elaine, go ahead.
Another thing that I think of when I think of Daniel is that he didn't isolate himself either.
Yeah.
It's one thing to be an upright person and to be by yourself somewhere, but he was a leader
Yeah.
in a community that was very different from him.
Great point. Great point. The only thing they know they can pin on him is he serves a foreign god, right? If we're going to draw some sort of negative attention, if we're going to somehow cast him in a negative light, it's going to have to be in the way that he serves this God of the Hebrews. And so in verse 6, then these high officials and satraps, we got 120 satraps, 119 I guess, minus Daniel. You got two other high officials that come by agreement to the king, and they say to him, "O King Darius, live forever." All the high officials of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the counselors, the governors are agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an injunction that whoever makes petition to any god or man for 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, pause. If you're a king and someone says that to you, what ought to be going through your mind? This is not a trick question. Let's just get it out on the table. Someone says this to you, you're the king, and they make a proposal like this, what ought to come to mind?
Power.
Okay?
He knows Daniel personally, and he knows what kind of man he is that he follows. And
All right.
That's what they said.
Maybe Daniel comes to mind, you would hope, right? Especially if he's on the verge of being put over this entire massive empire. First and Mark, go ahead. Before first and foremost.
Well, I would ask, what are they?
Yeah.
Because this homage that they pay to the king, it's already done.
Okay.
But to make a decree like this in 30 days.
All right.
Nothing else. No one.
What are you up to based on the fact, yes, I am the king, but that's not my place, right? Isn't that the first thing that ought to come to mind? That's not my prerogative. I am not God on earth, right? Now we know in ancient history, we can see it in other portions of the Old Testament even, that human beings, when they rose to great positions of power over empires like this, they began to talk like that, right? Think of Pharaoh in the Old Testament. We're going to see this in the New Testament in our study of Revelation with Caesar, right? People in great positions of influence so very easily and quickly come to think of themselves much too highly. Here's the kicker. Do you have to be the king of an empire in order to be guilty of that? No. We must not comfort ourselves in thinking, well, it's not really an issue for me because I'm not an emperor or an empress. No, it is a human tendency to think much too highly of ourselves, especially when there are those who are anxious to pile all sorts of accolades on us. You know, we've got this, in our modern vernacular, the idea of our head swelling and getting much too big, thinking much too highly of ourselves. A lot of times people do that because they're looking for something, right, as has already been brought up. That's the proposition that's being made, and we know why it's being made. What? Go ahead.
Also, you would think that he would know that they're kind of lying to him for the simple reason Daniel's not there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
not all of the high priests agree to this.
Yeah.
The angels compare.
One would think, right? But one, when one is honest with one's self, also understands we all have blind spots, right? And some of our biggest blind spots have to do with our pride. So, here's the proposition. For the next month, nobody can pray to any god or man except you. And if they do, throw them into a den of lions. Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked. Therefore, King Darius signed the document and injunction. When Daniel knew that the document had been signed, how much that first phrase in verse 10 adds to all of this, right? It is not that Daniel is unaware. It is not that he is, hopeful that he has misheard. He knows what has happened. He knows the injunction. He knows what's on the line. But listen, the reason this man at 80 is making the choices that he is because he's been making these choices since he was 18, let's say. Right? You don't wait until you're 80 years old to get serious about faith. That starts by remembering your Creator in the days of your youth. That has been Daniel. He goes to his house where he had windows in his upper chamber open toward Jerusalem. And of course, we think about what was in Jerusalem, what had been in Jerusalem, that is the center of what had been the temple. Lord willing, we're going to talk more about this in our Sunday morning class in just a couple of weeks. We also know what Nebuchadnezzar did to that temple, right? It's no longer standing. And so why are you facing Jerusalem? Perhaps it has something to do with what Solomon had prayed hundreds of years before at the dedication of this temple. Solomon, as he offers thousands of sacrifices, he prays to God when heaven is shut up and there is no rain because God's people have sinned against you. If they pray toward this place and acknowledge your name and turn from their sin when you afflict them, then hear in heaven and forgive the sin of your servants, your people Israel, when you teach them the good way in which they should walk, and grant rain upon your land, which you have given to your people as an inheritance. Ever since the days of Moses, this had been built into the covenant, right? God had said, if you obey, it will go well for you. If you disobey, I will pluck you out of this land and allow you to be carried off. And all that this I have given you, it will no longer be yours. And so Solomon, as he dedicates this great house, had prayed this prayer. The house wasn't there anymore, but Daniel understands it wasn't just about the physical building. It was about the God behind that, right? Daniel is praying toward Jerusalem. He gets down on his knees here in Daniel 6 and verse 10 3 times a day. And he prays. And he gives thanks before his God as he had done previously. Let me ask you, how in the world can you know this injunction? Know the people behind the injunction, know how all of this has been engineered, know that if you open your windows, odds are they're just right there waiting to see if you'll do it. How can you not only continue to pray like that, but give thanks to God? How do you give thanks to God when this is happening? Alex?
Daniel learned the lesson that his Israelite forefathers never did. When his Israelite forefathers experienced the miracles of God, they were selfish about it, or they didn't seek to heart the lessons there.
Okay.
Daniel has experienced those miracles throughout his entire life, and he's recognizing that God is in control and God has power, and all I need to do is obey him.
Okay. How do you give thanks to God in this circumstance, Aaron?
So it goes back to your first question. What is the purpose of what we've read so far, what we've studied so far in this class? We can look back easily and say, okay, we can read all of this, and okay, God is in control. We know that.
Yeah.
But Daniel knew that personally.
Okay.
And he had experienced that. And so whatever the situation was, no matter how bleak some may look at it or how wonderful some may look at it, God is in control, and he had a great appreciation for that.
Okay.
He lived that. And so we look back and we can appreciate it.
Yeah.
He, in the face of it, experienced that and understood that God was in control. And God will be glorified no matter what.
Yeah. He not only knows that God is in control, he has an intimate relationship with God. Right? I mean, you can know about God and not feel like giving thanks to God. Or you can know God, and that makes all the difference, regardless of what's going on. Right? Alan, go ahead.
We have to remember also that the circumstances of Daniel, he had a personal relationship with God.
Mm-hmm.
In our lifetime, we sometimes may think we have a personal relationship, but we don't reach the one Daniel. And that's a lot to give today.
Yeah. What is the relationship worth, is the question. We see what it is worth in Daniel's case, right? What am I willing to give up in this life in order to enjoy the fullness of joy? What will I abstain from in this life while the world is rushing into all sorts of impurity? I mean, so many examples of absolute filth and impurity all around us. On one hand, we can see it with our physical eyes, we can hear it with our physical ears. Bountiful opportunities, and here is Jesus on the other hand saying, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." And so, which do I want more, is the question, right? Do I want to go right along downstream in the filth of this world, or is it worth being different in order to inherit that promise, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God"? Paul and then Mark.
You know, I think we can see Daniel here. It isn't like he's contemplating, well, let's see, this is the fourth, fifth time. Should I?
Mine's already made up.
Trust and faith is already there.
Yeah.
He don't have to second guess himself of what he needs to do.
Yeah.
Same as what we know how God blesses us. We shouldn't question.
Yeah.
We just do it.
We emphasize in so many examples, especially from the Old Testament, you make up your mind whose you are before difficult times come, right? You make up your mind what sort of person of integrity you're going to be before the temptation comes knocking on your door, right? Once you make up your mind, now walk in the light of that decision no matter what. Mark, go ahead.
We have a tendency to look at this and think, God shut the mouths of lions. Daniel didn't know that. He was willing to proceed with the next day, knowing somehow, whatever events took place, God would be glorified.
Yeah. Several times now, we've noticed a lot on the line. You and I know the end of the story. These men are living the story. Right? They do not know what is going to happen. These men, verse 11, came by agreement. They found Daniel making petition and plea before his God. Surprise, surprise. They knew all along. Then they came near and said before the king concerning the injunction, "O king, did you not sign an injunction that anyone who makes petition to any god or man within 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions?" The king answered and said, "The thing stands fast according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked." Then they answered, "Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or the injunction you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day." Is that completely true? The latter part of it, of course, is completely true. Has it been true that Daniel pays no attention to you, O king? We've already noticed that that is not entirely the case, is it? It's just, here's the tension. Yes, I will serve the king, and I will be respectful to the king, and I will be the sort of citizen that the king would love to have. But when it comes to the king standing in opposition to my heavenly king, this is not a real question as to which way I'm going to go. That ought, of course, to make us think. Is our faith so solid, number one, and so evident, number two, that someone would know, well, this is how to get them, right? If I'm trying to get this person in a difficult situation, the way to do it is their unshakable faith. Would I have that sort of a reputation with the people that I interact with from day to day? Elaine, go ahead.
I was just thinking about the way that Daniel chose to, I don't want to say like defy, but to disobey this rule.
Yeah.
He could have done something different. Like he could have gone before the king and complained or made a big deal about it, but he chose to just serve God in the way that he'd always done. And I think sometimes when we're faced with situations like this, our first instinct is to be really loud and vocal with how much we disagree with something, instead of just to show people by the way that we're serving.
Yeah. Good thought. Good thought. Verse 14, then the king, when he heard these words, was much distressed and set his mind to deliver Daniel. Again, does that not tell us what sort of a man Daniel has been? He labored, the king, till the sun went down to rescue him. Then these men came by agreement to the king and said to the king, know, O king, that it is a law of the Medes and Persians that no injunction or ordinance that the king establishes can be changed. Then the king commanded. Daniel was brought and cast into the den of lions. The king declared to Daniel, may your God, whom you serve continually, deliver you. Now, that didn't just come out of a vacuum, right? That wasn't just a good sounding sort of thing to say. Again, Daniel is a man of faith. He is a man of open, unashamed faith, even in this most critical of moments. You just imagine, right? This is not a scene just on felt boards in a kid's class, right? 80-year-old man praying. A mob comes, takes him away, throws him into a den of lions. Verse 17, a stone was brought, laid on the mouth of the den. The king sealed it with his own signet and with the signet of his lords, that nothing might be changed concerning Daniel. Then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought to him, and sleep fled from him. Then, at break of day, the king arose and went in haste to the den of lions. As he came near to the den where Daniel was, he cried out in a tone of anguish. The king declared to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? Then Daniel said to the king, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me, because I was found blameless before him, and also before you, O king. I have done no harm. Look at the bottom of our material, this quote from Hebrews chapter 11. It's familiar, verses 32 and 33. And what more shall I say at the end of this long catalog of faithful men and women? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions. Isn't it interesting That in Daniel's words, and of course as the one who's experiencing it, he knows God is the one who shut the mouths of these lions. Daniel can't do that. Hebrews chapter 11 talks about how by faith the mouths of lions were stopped. God is more than able to do his part. Whether he chooses to do it in my time, in the way that I would like him to, that's up to him, right? My responsibility, no matter what, is to walk by faith. My responsibility is just to do the next right thing. Trust that if I have faith in him, he will be well pleased in me. Interesting intersection of Daniel's faith and the sovereignty of God. Verse 23, the king was exceedingly glad and commanded that Daniel be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up. No kind of harm was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. The king commanded those men who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought and cast into the den of lions, they, their children, and their wives. It is a gruesome, gruesome scene before they reached the bottom of the den. It is not that these lions were not hungry. It is not that these lions were stuffed or impotent or anything like that. The lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces. A tragic end to this story. Then, verse 25, King Darius wrote to all the peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in all my royal dominion people are to tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. We've heard this sort of thing before, right? Nebuchadnezzar did this, did he not? In Daniel 2, and then when circumstances changed a little, he conveniently forgot the sorts of things that he had said. He does it again in Daniel chapter 4. For his part, Darius is saying much the same thing. He is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall be put to the end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He who has saved Daniel from the power of the lions. As Alex has brought out, this man, at least in this moment, recognizes many of the things that descendants of Abraham had forgotten, right? Or completely ignored. So, as has been the case, this Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Very quickly, Alan, go ahead.
When he says no harm has been found, is he referring back to the 4th chapter where they're trying to find fault?
Well, I think, just in general, Daniel was not hostile to these men as long as the will of God did not come into play. Right? Now, very, very quickly. Daniel 1 through 6. Lots of interesting episodes that, of course, teach us good lessons about faith in God, but really emphasize in living, fleshly color, right? God is in control. Look at it in Daniel 1. Look 2. Look 3, 4, 5, 6. See that God is in control. And it's like it's right here in front of us on the earthly, human stage, and we understand that, and it's not all that difficult to wrap our minds around. What is about to happen as we go from Daniel 1 through 6 to Daniel 7 through 12 is, it's like the perspective is going to shift. Think about it from the standpoint of a documentary, let's say. And you've got kind of a first-person view of exactly what's going on, okay? And all that you can see is the stage, and you're watching as all of this happens in front of you, and you understand it, and you're inspired by it. Now, all of a sudden, what's about to happen is the perspective is going to shift. And it is as if we go behind the curtain on the other side, And we begin to see things now from God's perspective. And how often we remind ourselves, God doesn't think like us, right? God is high above us. And when we are ushered behind the veil, if you will, whether it's in the Old or the New Testaments, it becomes much harder to understand, right? Because we're no longer just sitting in a chair and watching on the stage. Now we're seeing behind the curtain. Think of it from the standpoint of a tapestry. You look at the front of it, and it's beautiful, right? And it's orderly, and you can start on I'll do your left. The left side of it, and you can go all the way across, and it's very linear and very practical. But if you go and you look on the back side of that tapestry, wow, it looks completely different, right? It's a mess. It looks like. But that's where all of the threads connect to form the picture on the other side. That's what we're about to experience, okay? What I need you to do is make sure to get a copy of the material for next week. It's got two sides. Lesson 7 for next week and Lesson 8 for the following week. Lord willing, next week we're just going to talk about some background stuff. 4 great empires. And then in lesson number 8, we'll really get into the text of Daniel 7. Okay? Thank you so much for being here. If you've got more that you'd like to talk about, I would love to do that with you.